newcomers, and welcome back my fellow Eternians. The last two videos on the channel have been about this feud between Cycoldia and Dracul. We got to hear President Luke from Dracul's side in his interview, but because my audio cut out, I have still not been able to upload Christina's, so we haven't even heard her views and opinions on the situation. Until today. To start off our interview, Christina told us a little bit about how Cycoldia was founded.
So I founded Cycoldia on the 6th of November 2018 after a short conversation with Kevin Baugh in email, um, where first flag was important. But we now got it right. We got a good flag finally. But through all of it, eventually I ended up founding Cycoldia, eventually got some friends with it. There was a few other micronations, but we've kind of outlasted them in the end. And we've kind of just grown from there.
So, after her conversation with Kevin Baugh of Molossia, Christina decided to take her nation to Microcon.
You mentioned Microcon actually, which that's actually how I heard about Dracul. Is I was talking with the Prime Minister of West Arctica, and I was chatting with him for a bit, and he actually had mentioned he was like, "Where are you guys located?" And I was like, "In Houston." He said, "Oh, we have." He was talking about how West Arctica has a really good ally there called Dracul. That's how we heard about them. So we contacted their Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Valentino approved the thing. We signed a treaty, but then we actually didn't do a lot with them for a bit. Eventually, we went and we started doing things with them.
So she meets Dracul through West Arctica, with Cycoldia and Dracul being only a few miles from each other. Then things really start to take off at the Christmas party.
Whenever I went to, for example, their Draculian Christmas party, which you might remember the photo of. Well, I had thought pretty positively of Stephen throughout that entire thing. And the Christmas party was a really good part for that as well. Um, I had felt fine with it all. Um, and honestly, it was completely okay of a relations, in my opinion, throughout it all. And I really enjoyed the Christmas party. Um, Basically, all of Dracul's officials were very nice to me. Um, I was really, I had no issues with Dracul.
At this point in the interview, Christina takes some time to show us some of her prized possessions from her time with Dracul and the founding of Cycoldia.
Yeah, I might take us on the move for a moment to show something that I have up in my room. I have here one of the technically rarest currency notes on Earth, which is a Dracul draft 50. It's a draft of a 50 Draculian note. And also relating to the founding of Cycoldia, this is the first notice ever put up for Cycoldia.
In talking about how highly she thought of Dracul, Christina also mentions how quickly bonds were formed between Cycoldia and Dracul in the creation of several pacts between their nations.
Because I was saying that I thought that Dracul was a really good fit with Cycoldia. I thought it was going to go really well. Um, I thought also that Dracul was highly professional. They were doing really well in a lot of things. They had great numbers on a bunch of stuff. It looked really awesome. In fact, one thing that a lot of people don't know, because technically it wasn't public, and now I'm making it public, was one reason with the Dracul Impotent Concession Zone agreement was partially in the hopes for eventually getting a mutual defense treaty. Which one reason for that was also just to show the closing ties. Which one thing with that also was that our entire military was meant to go to Prison Academy. We didn't all go there, sadly, but the door was open to them. But things like that, that was the hopes behind them. But eventually, it started kind of going downhill on some things.
Now, at this point, Christina starts to describe where tensions started to build between Cycoldia and Dracul, and it seems to all start with a man named Bruce Cooper.
If you read through statements that I have, which again, read through them, you can tell how it's not going well eventually. For example, you can see the letter that so if you read through here, actually no, I can just read it easier through my declarations in Imperial Order 2.5. Because that one, for people who do not know, IO 2.5 is the one that declares persona non grata. So it declares basically people who aren't allowed in the country. And on the 20th of November 2020, Bruce Cooper, who was a member of Dracul and I believe at the time was naturalization director, was added to be a persona non grata -3, which means that he cannot be a citizen or diplomat. That one was after a second incident, actually, where Bruce was required to apologize to me over insulting my mental health, which was the first kind of rough bump, but that was smoothed back out, and he sent me an apology. But then it hit back off in another one where essentially it was agreed that me and him just couldn't get along properly on things. He was declared a PNG-3. But then 5 days later, through some agreements and stuff, he was removed from it and then added right back on to the increased level. And he was increased to a -2, which means he also could not interact with our businesses. Any company that's licensed in Cycoldia could not work with him. Of which then he was. It was the hope that things could get better that day, and they didn't, and so they were back on. And then we agreed again to remove him from the list. Then in January 3rd, and then 5 days later, he was added back onto the list at -2 level. So he again could not interact with businesses or be a citizen or diplomat. And then later that year, he was increased from a -2 to the highest level of persona non grata, a PNG-1. Of which it is defined as not being able to hold citizenship, be a diplomat, you're not able to work with businesses, and you are banned from conducting influence inside the bounds. So, like, if he was on any diplomatic team, we could send out the diplomatic team. Yeah. At the time that he was first added, I believe he was actually no, here I can check. Yes, the time he was first added, he was the director of the Federal Naturalization Service. I checked that because I read his official apology, which I can read off if you would like me to. His position now is Secretary to the President.
Christina and Bruce's feud ends up with a restraining order from the Dracul government against Bruce in order to protect Christina.
It was both. It was both. For example, his office had to send me an apology as a foreign leader, but within Dracul, I was given a civil restraining order against him within Dracul, which was signed by I believe, if we go to this now, I believe he is, yeah, the current Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Dracul. He was not, he was at the time. So yeah, it was signed by the Chief Justice of the Dracul Supreme Court. That this was agreed by me, Stephen, and Bruce, because Stephen basically said, you two cannot have a time in which you talk that doesn't involve in some diplomatic incident or a giant fight. So would you like this? And I said yes, and he was like, fine. Because I wasn't instigating it. And I was the one who was repeatedly asking to never talk to that man again.
After hearing all of this, I wanted to know a little bit about what got Christina to be a citizen of Dracul in the first place.
Um, one random night in which we just happened to be talking about stuff, and Stephen was on there, and we happened to talk about that. and we were talking about some stuff within Dracul, and I had expressed interest in possibly becoming a citizen, and he approved it that night.
Now we're really starting to get to the focal point of this video, the Dracul Blue Party debate.
So what happened was the Draculian Blue Party announced its founding, and it stated that it was pro-Christianity and politics. And I opened to debate with them about religion and politics. And after a bit of a debate, they sent it. They said they were going to bed, and they sent a video of a guy talking, and they said that they agreed with what he said. And that guy in the video started being horrifically homophobic. Like the video they sent at like for most of it, it's like just this guy being really weird about religion and politics. And at the end, he goes and I believe he says something like he said something of the sort of like first it's gay marriage, then they ban Christianity or something like that. Like just blatant fear mongering.
To give a little bit of context to what Christina's talking about here, here's a snippet from that video that was shown during the debate.
And there is coming a time in this nation, and we're very close, and you'll see when we talk about same-sex marriage here in the next couple nights. There's coming a time when you pick up the Bible, you might be fined or jailed for quoting verses that are inconsistent with homosexuality, unless we stand strong against this current movement. Because wherever same-sex marriage is put into law, the Bible becomes hate speech. And Christians become bigots. It's total nonsense, as we'll see in future nights. It's not bigotry at all, it's good common sense. But they throw all this at you. And legally, they're going to begin taking away our rights to practice our religion freely and to practice our free speech rights. In fact, there is a law working its way through Congress right now called the Hate Crimes Law. And that hate crimes law will basically make anyone who opposes homosexuality potentially liable for hate crimes.
And I was like, and the first thing I said with that was, Carl, is this what you believe? I was like, is this what you support? And later on, and his response to that was he alleged that gay parents are bad for a child, which is wrong. 75 of 79 Cornell studies prove that that is wrong. Which, just FYI, he never responded to it being wrong. He just moved on. Then he said that they, quote, would endorse doing it the right way. Of which I then asked them, is that not the right way? And they said no, that being trans is, quote, not the right way. Yes. He said of that it was not the right way. And that was from Carl Frederick, who is the incumbent naturalization director, who is also the guy who puts down gender on forms for citizens.
So now we get to hear about another important figure in this whole story, Isadoro Amafitano.
And I called him, I was like, and I also had said, because one of the people endorsing it was Isadoro, I don't know how to pronounce his last name, sorry, Amalfitano. He had said something such as the same. He literally like said that was not the right way as well. He backed up his friend in the Blue Party, because they're both in the Blue Party, and he is a member of the cabinet. He is the current now Secretary of the Treasury, and at the time he was the pick for Secretary of the Treasury. So I had basically said, Stephen, both of these guys are on your staff. You haven't said anything. You were in this conversation before and you're online. What is it? And he had said that he would not denounce their opinions because they were their, quote, personal opinions and they didn't affect their government office. Which I had said that those kinds of opinions are inherent with their bias. If you don't think that being trans is correct, you now have an inherent bias against a trans person. Because that is part of who they are. If you don't think being gay is correct, you have an inherent bias against a person who's gay.
So I then asked Christina if she felt that those views actually had a deeper effect on Dracul's politics, and what her opinion was as a Dracul official.
I lost the election for mayor of Brand to Isadoro. I lost my first Draculian election to the guy who later said that being trans is wrong. To one of the people who said that it is not the right way. I lost that election, and he was later impeached because he was being a very bad official. That man is now the Secretary of the Treasury. His career went onwards and upwards. Mine ended up as the member at large of the Brand City Council, which was then dissolved for inactivity because the chairman went right back, and the chairman was removed, who was one of Dracul's first openly gay officials, who was removed on semi-false allegations of corruption. I'm saying semi-false because I'm not going to get into if they're correct or not. But he states they're incorrect, and he has said that he had evidence, and the Dracul Supreme Court even went to overturn its own case on it. So there's like no opinion basically on it. But he was still removed from the country and is not allowed back, despite there being almost no ruling on it. That kind of thing is not okay. And to say, well, you won an office. Yeah, I won one of the smallest offices in the country. This guy is the Secretary of Treasury. As well, to say, well, you got an office, so there can't be transphobia. There's public officials in the US who have offices who are trans, and the far right in the United States is still aggressively transphobic. In fact, in the South, where the far right is more popular, the chance of dying as a trans person in some places is almost 2 times higher than places in the North. Sometimes I think that one said that it was, I think that one thing that I read said that it was 4 times higher in some parts of Texas than it was in New York. To say, well, you got elected, so there's none, is like saying, well, I have a gay friend, so I can't be homophobic. Like, you can still tolerate homophobia. You can even, the gender's proved, you can be trans and transphobic now. Like, it's not applicable. And there can still be a fostered attitude of the more extremist you get, the more popular you are. That can still be fostered even with officials who are actively against that. Enough that I can say, on Dracul's announcement they were doing that no longer, one of the top replies to them on Twitter is somebody saying, and I quote, "They, she, he can't contain they, her, their, her, his anger towards you because of their, her, his, period." And whenever I had announced against them, that same person said on my comment, quote, "Okay, calm down. I'm going to use the exact word they used here, despite it being horrible, because this kind of thing is to get attention." They said, and I quote, "Okay, calm down, transvestite. Don't fall into the rabbit hole. Hell." So whenever that's your supporters, I think it's pretty easy to say that you don't have the best movement going. Whenever you have a community that fosters people like that to support you, you can't then say, well, we've fostered a community that's accepting of all people. Because whenever you say accepting of all people, intolerance should not be one of the things you're accepting. Being tolerant to intolerance is not tolerance. In fact, actually, today, Stephen went to talk with me about stuff. And he had said that personally he still considers me a friend. And he said, no matter the issue, but he said, even though that there is that, and he had said that they wanted to like talk about it more in private. Of which my response there is that while I truly do want to believe that he does consider me a friend and that there isn't a personal issue against me, I can't believe that. The amount of things he's said and the actions he's done, I can't believe that anymore. I want to the bottom of my heart, I want to believe that. I've been friends with him for basically 2 years. I very much want to believe that. But I can't get myself to. Because whenever he says, in one statement, he says that he's enjoyed conversations with me. And then 10 minutes later, says that him even talking to me is pathetic on his part. That's a quote. That's a quote. That was in a conversation with him afterwards, in which he said, and I quote, "Arguing with you is pathetic on my part." Whenever, and he said as well regarding my concern on this topic, he said, and I quote, "This right here alone is exactly why the Dracul State Department changed recognition to micronations to those who are 17 and above due to maturity." Of which I have the full list of the things that he said to me after his statement from his office said that he enjoyed talking with me. His statement even opens up by saying that he has enjoyed the company and discussions held with me. But then, literally there, he said, then literally a little bit afterwards, he said things such as, "I think someone needs to remind you that the world does not revolve around you." Quote, "I am almost 31 years old, and the fact that you're still a kid and we're having this argument is honestly pathetic on my part, and I shouldn't have even welcomed it in the first place." That doesn't track. And in the statement, it also says things such as that he believes that Isadoro's things that he said, which was saying that being trans is not the right way, he had said things such as saying that he believed that no hatred had occurred. It says specifically, quote, let me read it exactly off of it. I have it right here. It's just a little bit. He says that he also cited that they used she/her pronouns here. I haven't found the thing yet, but here we go. He said that he makes it abundantly clear that Dracul does not discriminate, and he says that personal attacks and violence against others is never permitted. So he considered mine personal attacks. But he did not consider the other one personal attacks. What they said, he did not consider this personal attacks. He also says in it that it was respectful to use my pronouns while in conversation. In my opinion, that isn't respect. That's basic decency. That not using someone's pronouns is not just not respectful, because it's saying that you don't think that person is to the level of a person, essentially, as you are. It's kind of claiming superiority. And so saying, well, they didn't misgender you. Like, fool, they said my entire existence was wrong. That small thing. They only said that I shouldn't be me. Doesn't track. Yeah.
From there, I asked whether she felt that the issues with Dracul were something that were fundamental to its creation, or whether they were a change in culture somewhere along the way.
It's a change in culture, most definitely. I personally, at the very least, cite it to when, have you heard of Hymatia? I cite it that the main issue occurred whenever they dissolved. because most of their officials then went to Dracul. And Hymatia was extremely far right. And so whenever those officials went to Dracul, they already had connections, they already had everything. And so they started becoming Draculian officials. But their attitudes didn't change. The Blue Party's leader is the former Chancellor of Hymatia. The guy who was endorsing Karl Frederick, former mayor of Bran, but also former Hymatian citizen. A lot of people who are endorsing the things that are going on that are horrific is from that. And Dracul has stood idly by because they were our ally, they were close with us. And I feel like because it just merged Dracul with Hymatia and just put it all into Dracul, that it devalued Dracul somewhat, in my opinion. Because while Hymatia was perfectly fine sometimes, and they were perfectly fine if you never went internal. If you never went into any of the stuff they did internally, it was great. I was considering a treaty with them because externally they were great. But the moment that they became more solidified Draculian officials, it went to shit. Because then you got to see all the skeletons fall out of the closet at the same time.
I also asked, what could Dracul do to change?
By being accepting and not being, because while somebody might say that being tolerant means that you need to tolerate everything and that everything is fine, that's not really true. Because I believe there was a really good explanation of this with the paradox of it's like called like the paradox of tolerance, just like that. That if you're too tolerant, then you lose all of your tolerance. Because the moment you get too tolerant, you start becoming tolerant to like the intolerant. He's essentially said you cannot be tolerant to intolerance. Because once you tolerate intolerance, that will go supreme over whatever it was. And that will find a way to seep in. So you cannot tolerate, so that even though you're being tolerant, you cannot tolerate those who are intolerant. Which I think is a really good way of essentially explaining that even though it has great things of saying like you should support what anybody says for the right to say it, like support their right to say it. I support anybody's right to say anything, but I don't support the lack of wanting to do consequences. As Stephen even said that I always say, freedom of speech is not freedom from consequences. Which he had said that in relation to my statement, citing that I always say it, which I basically said that making a public statement saying about how I don't like being told that my identity is wrong kind of shouldn't get consequences. Maybe it deserves like a response statement about why they disagree. If they put out a response statement of why they disagree, yeah, expected, fair, we can have a few statements, maybe talk diplomatically about it. Which that would be a very moderate approach, right? To just put another statement in response. Whenever I suggested that to Stephen, the day that he announced that they were no longer doing relations, he said he wouldn't, quote, stoop to my level on that.
Then for a moment, we actually kind of backtracked to talking about Christina's citizenship once more.
Also, though, I will state that there is one time before that I felt slightly uncomfortable with Dracul, and it was the day that I became a citizen, because I'm going to read out my citizenship form. Personal description of holder as date of issuance of this certificate. Sex, transgender. It does not specify male or female. It just says trans. Which, I just felt a little bit uncomfortable with that. No. Although I do know who the director of naturalization was at the time, but it was a guy named like Robert, and then I can't read the last name because they didn't write his name down, but they wrote the signature. But I know this was approved by Stephen, but I didn't bring it up at the time because I was like, they're trying. I was like, they're trying. Although I did find it very funny that they put they have an entire section. So the sections they have on it is sex, date of birth, country of birth, race, complexion, color of eyes, color of hair, height, weight, visible distinctive marks, religious preference, marital status. Of which, at the time of me becoming a Draculian citizen, my country of birth was the U.S. at the time. I put my color of eyes as hazel because they are. Fun fact: my hair is not brown. My hair is blonde genetically. But religious preference. Half of this, by the way, is me like not wanting to give information. So religious preference unaffiliated, visible distinctive marks not applicable, and it has address at address withheld, Houston, Texas.
So, you may be wondering at this point, like I was, where does all of this leave Dracul-Cycoldia relations?
The relations that had transpired over that was the relations that we had was good. Good relations in my opinion. But I feel like it undercut all of it to dissolve it like over one statement. Like if, for example, he had announced that he was going out of Napokotania, it would be still an overreaction, but more reasonable. But to be fair, also though, for like the months leading up to it, I was having to consult with my foreign minister quite commonly over what should happen with Dracul, because we had an increasing number of incidents. And vaccines and COVID stuff. It was mainly incidents that relate to progressivism and COVID misinformation.
What I would say by now is that what Cycoldia is doing is we're coming to grips of a future without Dracul. Because, at least to me, it's pretty obvious that Dracul isn't gonna do relations with us again. They've written so much about all of it that things like that don't go away, as evident from them bringing up like a few months old, very small incident as half of their reason. That things like that just don't go away very easily. That just not stepping in on this kind of stuff and not doing much is just kind of gross. But also, fun fact that there that during a discussion with Dracul on it later, after his office statement, I was debating with him in Dracul about it as a foreign official, basically going back and forth. Which part of the point of that was also so that other people can see both sides. Of which, in the middle of that, I had gotten, the new feature, the Discord timeouts? I had gotten one. I got a minute timeout And Stephen didn't know why I wasn't talking because he wasn't the one to do it. It was randomly the Attorney General had decided to give me that. And Stephen was like, we didn't mean to do that. That was not approved. Do not do that. We were talking. And then, like, 5 minutes later, bans me from the server. 5 minutes later, removes me from the whole server. The Attorney General had been the guy who had done the timeout, and then was like, no, that was not approved. Don't do that. And then Stephen later removed me from the server. I think that the second that Stephen's not in power, it's going to get worse. Because Stephen, relatively, is a moderate. In fact, also though, I don't think there's going to be a year where Stephen, at least soon, I don't think there's going to be a time where he's not the president of Dracul. I don't think he's going to get removed from office or not elected. I remember a time in which, because I used to be somewhat influential in Dracul as a member of the city council Bran, I remember a time in which I had heard from one person was freaking out because there's a proposal to make Stephen president for life. So, like, Dracul is a democracy, but Stephen is definitely going to stay in charge for a very long time. Which, in relation to, is that good or bad for Dracul, that's the better option here. Because even though Stephen's cabinet might be about as effective as Trump's, he's much better than Trump. And he's a good guy at his core. But I think it's been clouded recently around that. It's just sad. Stephen was basically an interim president. The president barely popped by. Although I will say, the president was a great guy. Great guy. His position was actually moved to because he does medicine. He was moved to Surgeon General. But he's a fine guy. He's a great guy. I've had some really good conversations with him in the past. But yeah, no, Stephen was definitely the one in charge. He was the one doing everything. Cycoldia does have the GA, although the General Assembly is very much monarchist, I will state. Like, although if any of my party officials said the stuff he said, they would be out of the party the next day or that night. If any of them did the things that the officials that Dracul had, boom. I might even, as speaker, declare that would be grounds for removal from the assembly. Like one way that I actually broke the news to Lytera was I said, okay, I got good and bad news for you. Good news, Lytera is now Cycolia's closest diplomatic partner. Bad news, we lost Dracul, and that's why. Bad news, Dracul walked out, and that's the reason why. And they're like, that's good, and also we're doomed.
With all this tension and the close proximity of these two countries, I'm curious to know if Dracul and Cycoldia are becoming primed to be local competition for each other.
Honestly, the only way that I could see it becoming competitive is with online Spectrum on competitive. I don't see local competition happening much. But yeah,
And Christina also had a bit to say about us having President Luke on to share Dracul's perspective.
I would love to also hear how he answers questions, because whenever I asked him a lot of questions, he didn't really answer some of them. Because most of the time, whenever I said, "What's your opinion on this?" he would go, "That's their personal opinion." I was like, "Then what's your personal opinion?" Yeah, but I would genuinely love to see him on here. The reason why, I'm fine saying this, the reason why I didn't really want to have him on the same time as me is because I feel like, as a former friend, I can't properly really look him in the eyes as he says things that are pretty bad. Just being somebody who believes that my way of being me is wrong.
And what was happening inside of Cycoldia during all of this?
I would say for the initial incident that they were not 100% at fault, because Dracul is a state, is not 100% at fault for everything that their officials say. They are slightly at fault for not reacting, but they're not at fault for everything they say. But I would say that for the severing of relations, that it would be debatable if they were completely at fault for that, because it was the decision that they independently made. I will also remind you that at no point, at literally no point, did they tell my foreign minister they were even considering it. They never, whenever I put out a statement denouncing their cabinet, I warned them. When they destroyed all relations in one day, they didn't even warn my government once. Literally, the same day they did that, I had to hold a meeting with my chief of armed forces about how the military would even function without Prazan. Because Prazan is our official military academy. Like, that's what we have on documents for, if you want to become an officer, go to Prazan. So suddenly losing Prazan in one day, no, at the time they spoke to him, it was 1 hour. Like, that's just not feasible. He even said to me, like, the moment that I said that, he said, and I'm slightly paraphrasing here, but I do know that he did use this exact curse word. He turned to me, he said, "Ah, shit, is that more work?" Which I just thought was the funniest response, too. "We've lost all relations with them. How are we going to function?" He's like, "Is that more work for me to have to?" I was like, "We need a whole new syllabus." And then eventually I was like, "Wait a second. We can salvage some stuff. We can salvage some things. We have the things. We have the things that we can still display. We can't claim they're ours, but we will say that we'll say where we got them." But now, although just if I'm going to say that that also is in there. And I called a cabinet meeting to take place later, but I rescheduled the cabinet meeting. I had a short meeting with the foreign minister as well. And just FYI, if you were a Cycoldian official that ran something that had to do with Dracul, or like any of that, guaranteed that morning you would have gotten at least 3 calls from me. Like if you didn't answer them, at least 3 missed calls. My prime minister, who was in the same building as me, got tons of calls from me, being like, "Where are you? We need to talk now." And I did actually have a meeting with the prime minister on the 13th, which was here at my house, which is officially the palace. So we had a full meeting at the palace. We were like, "Okay, here's what happened. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go." And this is just a slight fun fact. But you know how Stephen kept saying, "We call upon the prime minister to announce these decisions," and all that stuff? Whenever the prime minister was reached out to by Granger Brent for a comment to give on the article, because you may notice there's no quotes from the prime minister on it. It's because the comment they tried to submit was, and I quote, "fuck Dracul." But we did not accept expletives in the article, and they could not figure out a way to reword it. And that was the reason they were not cited, is because their statement was an expletive against them. Because they were livid. Because the Prime Minister looks at it basically as their officials are transphobic. Not even our government, but the monarch responded back, and they blame the entire government and cut relations because their officials are transphobic. And it also is of note, the Prime Minister is also trans. So you might not want to be blatantly transphobic to the country that has, as calculated, 30% of the government as trans, and the entire executive and monarchy. 2/3 of my office, of my office staff that can be counted, is trans. Me, the regent, the custodian of the crown. The custodian of the crown is the only cis person. Probably don't want to be transphobic to that office.
I then ask, have there ever been any other circumstances in which being a monarch of your own nation and being the citizen of another country have caused any conflict?
Yeah, and I deal with that actually. That's a pretty common thing for me to deal with. For example, one recent one is, which isn't, there's no issues that have come up with this place. I'm just naming a place that came off the top of my head that I'm a citizen of. Winland. I am the Baroness of Grimlick in Winland, which basically grants me citizenship because of that. So if I address in Winland, am I addressing as a foreign official or as the Baroness of the place? But no issues have come up from that because if essentially it could be kind of assumed that if you're talking to foreign state officials, you're acting as a monarch. If you're talking to internal officials, and I said multiple times in the debate, as a citizen, and I kept going back to as a citizen of Dracul, and every time that I would continue going against it, they would sometimes say that I was trying to influence the government. I'm like, no, I'm a citizen here. I'm talking to you. Same thing, except you're a higher ranking official. And I even used to have the tag on the Discord server as a retired government official. Because I was like, yeah, I'm serving in those political offices and shit. But one reason why you might see me continuously moving this flag around. This flag flew outside the palace for so long that you can tell it's faded. And actually, if you look at the things, you can see that they're visibly aged. This is the same flag that flew beside the Draculian flag at the palace during Charles's trip. And that's why I brought it up. Because this is the thing. Yeah, this is the same one, and I took that photo actually. This is the same one that flew there. We don't even have the actual flagpole that flew this flag because the flagpole became too damaged. But this is the same one that flew there, and it is also still visibly aged. So you can tell how old it's been flying there, and it will never fly with a Draculian flag again outside the palace because I don't see in the future Dracul having a meeting here. Even whenever we still have relations, they didn't appoint a new ambassador for a long time. Every time I tried to remind them, hey, you need to appoint a new ambassador, they were like, that, and then they wouldn't respond for 3 months. Or they would say they have a shortage of staff. I'd be like, okay. That guy just got named to a very specific position. A very specific position. We need somebody who manages all of Nepocatania and all of our affairs with Dracul. And Dracul had listed us at one point as their closest ally. Although that is in contention. That was in contention for a few months. Because, did you read their statement on Haimatia's dissolution? Like their original one, because they did have to update it, because I complained. I will read you the wording here. I don't know. There you go. Something's just gone out. But the exact statement says that it was their, quote, closest ally, both diplomatically and physically. Of which, in one of my internal office, like just internal personal memos I put out, it says that is seeming to forget that Cycoldia is approximately 2.54 kilometers away from Dracul, while the Haimatian colonial empire is approximately 290 kilometers away from Dracul. And so they later changed the statement to say that it was their closest ally diplomatically. But then one thing that ended up happening was that a field marshal, Field Marshal Scott Jeans, ended up saying, well, closest not as in physical regarding Hamatia, but in terms of friendship and unwavering support and always having Dracul's back. I'd say it's fair to say they were our closest allies diplomatically and militarily. Why is he saying that? He's not winning points with Hymatia. They just dissolve. Who does that help? But also, yeah, but he said that directly to me. No, that was during me talking to Steven. And I was like, oh, thank you, Scott. It was kind of like, thank you, Scott. Thank you for your opinion. I'm writing it. Also, I made sure to include a misspelling and put sick on my internal thing. Just being slightly petty. Whenever I said Dracul's, he said it in the plural form instead of apostrophe. So I put Dracul's sick. I put sick. Exactly what he said. Which just why I said in my thing, because this is in my personal archive. I said this seems to devalue the amount of support Cycoldia is devoted towards aid and endorsement of Dracul and the amount of work this is required, as well as the statement from Dracul itself was changed instead to state that Haimati was Dracul's closest ally, which seems to be supporting his view. Because to be like, oh, sorry, we didn't mean diplomatically and physically. They were our closest ally instead. Just in general, then? Oh, thanks. Thanks. Really helps your remaining allies. You know, like me in West Arctica, who gave them awards for free. Stephen will sustain that he still considers me a personal friend, despite saying it's pathetic to argue with me, and despite making a ton of statements saying like that I have done abhorrent things and having articles entitled that my quote personal dispute leads to breakdown in relations. And like really just going against me in the press. Ah, yes. And alleging that I never cared about Dracul. Ah, great friends, Stephen.
This final part of the interview I think is very important to pay attention to, because it's Christina summarizing how she felt this situation affected her personally.
Specifically stating that what happened was wrong and that they disagree with it would be a really good first step, to say that what happened was wrong and they disagree. None of saying, well, it wasn't true transphobia. None of being like facetious with it. To just say it plain, straightforward. Like that. Also, though, he says that he was not amused when I called him a silent endorser. I was not amused when members of his government said that my entire identity was invalid. That was not amusing to me. It wasn't really amusing to realize that the person who was in charge of the place that I'd almost done relations with didn't think that I should exist as me. That wasn't amusing. And one really telling line of his letter, which I would like to read out, which this is the line that I feel like kind of really says what they were trying to not say, which they didn't technically because they sent it into a letter to me. But what it says is, and just to play, this is thick. This is exactly how it says. Dracul allies should always maintain respect towards our government while respectfully disagreeing in private. And my response to that specifically is that the idea that everybody should maintain respect towards the government to be allied with it doesn't understand how it is to be allied to something. There are videos going all around of like every world leader shit talking Trump. Because that wasn't the United States. That was this guy, this specific guy. Whenever I say I don't agree with this guy, I'm not saying Dracul bad. I'm saying that guy's bad because of this, this, this. It's not an attack on Dracul's government. It is me saying that guy's bad. So they keep trying to paint themselves as the victim of some insane attack by me. Oh no, I've attacked them. Whenever they have government officials who extensively said that I should not be able to be me. Who extensively said that in the future they don't believe that I should be able to marry my girlfriend. That they don't think that that should be done. That they think that it would hurt any kids that we might have. Whenever you say it like that, it kind of gets more to the point across that the beliefs they stated was essentially that I should not be as I am, that in the future I shouldn't be able to marry the person who I love, and that if I were to have any children with the person who I love, that they would be hurt because I am me. Saying it like that, which is what it is, that's what it's saying. But saying it like that really gets the point across of how hurtful and discriminatory those things are to say. Yeah. Yeah. And it's sad that happened. I wish that none of this had happened. And I will say that if Stephen was right, if I didn't care about Dracul, I wouldn't have put out any statement. I wouldn't have become a citizen. I wouldn't have been on the Brand City Council. I wouldn't have cared to debate it. If I didn't care about Dracul, those treaties would be gone a long time ago. The reason why those treaties stayed is because I cared about Dracul. Because under what would normally happen, if a place said the things that they said about vaccines, I would have had 5 statements from my office. Like that. But they got none. Because I cared about Dracul. I didn't want to damage them in their micronation. But whenever I was calling ceasefire every time something happened, they went for the head instantly. Shows that those feelings of wanting that were not reciprocated. The feelings of wanting that special bond isn't a shared feeling. And that they didn't care. It's not fun. It's not fun. I feel like what has been said is all that needs to be really said here. That the statements from each office, and that all of the things that have repeatedly continued through, all of it kind of boils to this. That sadly, this is the direction it went. I would have hoped that they would have stood up for what they have insisted is right in the past. They decided not to, which is sad. But it just shows that those values was not the top of their priority list. And I wish that they were. But sometimes life doesn't give you everything. And sometimes life gives you a slap in the face. And this is one of the times in which life has decided to just really hard give a slap in the face. And I will end it by also saying that this kind of incident will not be forgotten. This will be painted into the memory of every one of my government officials who has had to deal with this. That this will be a thing anytime that we go to work with the Dracul in the future. Which already seems like a fantasy to think. The thing I'll also say is that the day that Dracul abolished relations, later that night I went into the Dracul server to talk about it as well. And it felt like everybody was trying to get career advancement, and shooting their shot at me was the way that they could do it. It felt like everybody was vying for a promotion of best person to get insults at me. Because even Steven was happy to delete like a ton of their things. And it just doesn't compare to a lot of things. And I'm not even out at school as trans. Because sadly the state of the world is not in a state where I even would feel safe with that. I was bullied for 1 year solidly throughout. Not even because I was trans, but because 3 people thought that I might be. Then I was bullied for an entire year. Including physically. Where the entire time, the teacher of that class stood at the front of the room and did nothing. The most that he did was he told one of them to fuck off at the very end of the year. And that was really telling to me, that the only time he was willing to stand up was the very end of it all to one person that didn't want to put his neck out for anybody. Even no matter his personal beliefs on it, he's not a bad guy, but still he's like that, man. Sad reality. Like he said in one of his things that he said, he is almost 31, and I am 16. Although one thing that was especially damaging to me personally was not, in fact, personally, the transphobia didn't really hit me because I'm used to that. I have to deal with people calling me fucking slurs from across the aisle. That didn't hit me. What hit me was that Stephen was willing to then afterwards say the things he did. because he has helped me as a friend with mental health issues and a lot of stuff, a lot. And he knows the amount of struggles that I've gone through. That's one reason why he made Bruce one time give an official apology, because Bruce had insulted my mental health. Because I have gone through, within that, things worse than what I think a lot of the population would imagine in nightmares. That when sometimes I close my eyes, I see it again. That nobody should ever want to see. And he knows that I've had to have those experiences. And for somebody who I've relied on in those times to say that I never cared, or to say that him arguing with me is pathetic on his part, devalues everything he's ever said to me about that. And every word that comes out of his mouth with that is just hitting the core, everything, once more. And it's just sad.